presenting sponsors, especially Route Song, because not only are they providing the space, they're providing the food, they're providing the drinks, they're providing the dogs. So a big thank you to Route Song, as well as a big thank you to Woodland Cemetery and Arboretum that, of course, hosted us last night, and Dodge Memorials. I'd also like to thank our event sponsor, Rock of Ages Corporation, for being an event sponsor, and then also Techstone Granite, Cold Spring Granite, and Roberson Law for being sponsors as well. So I appreciate that support. That helps us to offset the costs of this and allow us to make this to happen. So again, I want to welcome you back. And now we've had a conversation about grief. And just like everything in this event, everything kind of interweaves and laces together. And you probably heard multiple times the term death doula. Well, now we're going to actually talk to a death doula so that she can explain kind of what that is, and then talk about the passion she has as a death doula. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring up, go ahead and jump on in.
These
and I'm going to help
are-
out. Yes.
This is my handout for
This
everybody.
is your handout. Okay, so we're gonna welcome Jen as our death doula while I hand out stuff. So everybody, welcome back.
All right, as he said, my name is Jen Blolock, and I do work as a death doula. And, you know, people often will say to me, death doula, you know, that's so in your face. And there are many words for this. People will say end-of-life doula, a midwife, you know, many creative terms. But I tend to be a person who takes the Band-Aid off fast. And so I like to just operate from the fact of reality right from the beginning. If you're working with me, we're working together because of something to do with death. So we're not going to spend an hour and a half kind of slowly getting our way there. And there might be other doulas who would be more slow and meandering, but that would not be me. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm here not so much to talk about exactly what a death doula does. I'm here to, the title of this presentation is Easing Grief by Creating a Death Plan. Okay, you've had a lot of information in the last 2 days. And so what I want to present today and have you go home with is a way for you to put together your plan for your death to help your family. Okay, so the context for me, I'm 62 years old. I'm a woman. I am single. I have no children. I have 4 siblings, okay? And I do have a father who's 94 years old. I am not ill. Death is not imminent for me, okay? But I have put together my death plan because if I don't have a plan, that would be terrible for my siblings who would be trying to jump in and figure out, what does Jenny want, you know? And so that's why I put together the plan. And when it's done, so much relaxation, because I have taken the time to contemplate what I want so that my family can be able to step in and take care of that and not guess. And I loved something, Neil, that you said, that like, maybe, what would your family want? Okay, so my situation's simple, but most people do have kids, and other people might want to factor into what what the family might want. How can we accommodate more than just the person the one individual, right? And so I love that. If we can do a death plan, and we can just kind of get through those little bit of rough waters and gain comfort with the subject of death, then we're more able to talk about it openly with the people who love and care for us and the people who are going to make the plan happen, right? So it's a conversation starter, But it's first and foremost, I think, something for each individual to contemplate. So what I often say, and it's Barbara Carnes, who was mentioned earlier she's a hospice nurse who has an amazing amount of experience. And she says, we either die suddenly or gradually. There's really not a lot in between. We die suddenly or we die gradually. Let's be prepared for both scenarios. This is why young people who are perfectly healthy should be putting together a death plan. Maybe, and you don't have to do all of this death plan, but some of the key points in it. Because even if a young person, like it's nice if people know, well, what would that person prefer at the end of their life? Okay, so this is part of what death awareness and the conversation is. What can we do to be prepared? Okay, so what this is in front of us is a 12-point death plan where you can sit down and just one by one start to contemplate what some of these are. And so we're going to go through them. I'm not going to read this whole document to you, but we're just going to go through and I'm going to elucidate it with stories. And I will also just highly encourage any of you to chime in. This is a good active group. So we begin that I just want to take notice of this paragraph. It can feel overwhelming to get this task done. Can anybody relate to that? Like, I really feel like I should be doing this, and then it's overwhelming. I'm a death doula, so it's kind of like I should be walking my talk. That was part of my motivation to get it done. But, I procrastinated like you can't believe. And I really had to work with myself. Let's sit down and get this done. So what I have in front of you is the model, is what I use for myself from many, many different resources. So one of my little things I brought today, this is my death plan, okay? So we might refer to certain parts of it. And in this plan, you learned all about estate planning and all of that stuff. Okay, so all of that stuff is going to be going on the side, okay? What you need to do for your estate, for your home, for your finances, whether you're working with attorneys and those kind of professionals, that needs to happen. What this plan does is bring your last wishes into being, okay? And so this is the document that if a person if you died suddenly, then boom, your people need to be able to find this document so they know what you want immediately. If you're in the I'm dying gradually, then you could have your first draft of this done, but it's going to change, because like if you're given a life-limiting illness, it changes people, right? And so this document will change over time. So procrastination is very much a part of this, but overcoming discomfort with the subject of death helps us to take responsibility for our end. And when everybody knows what to do when you die, there is far less stress, which helps the grieving process. Okay? That's the tie-in to grief here. So that if you as an individual are taking care of these decisions yourself, then the people who love you and your family members, it's a giant love letter to them. They are going to be so appreciative that they have a roadmap of how to proceed. And has anybody here ever known somebody who died and had no roadmap? Okay. Even at a death cafe a couple months ago, there was a group of like 30 somethings, 35, and they're all like, we have parties now to complete our advanced care directives. And I'm like, you're like 35. And they said, why? Because of this friends group, 2 or 3 of them had parents who died, leaving no instructions, no will, no, what do you want to be, what do you want your funeral? Do you want to be buried, cremated? Nothing. And it created complete chaos in their lives. And I thought, well, that's a very insightful young group of people to do that together. So that's what our purpose is. Are there any questions about that before I jump in here? Okay, so just my document, let's just take a look at what my document looks like page-wise. I'm 2, 3, 4 pages, okay? And so it's not like a huge amount. And we begin with a title, simple. It should clearly reference what the document is. Mine is called Last Wishes for Jennifer Blolock. Original, right? But it gets the job done. And then I do find, though, in today's world, especially with the younger generation, there's so much cleverness with titles and being able to use words. So use your creativity. There's nothing wrong with using your creativity, but just make sure people know what it is. And then at the very top, I have Last Wishes for Jennifer Blolock updated on October 25th, 2024. Since I put this together for you, I took I just took the opportunity to update my plan, of which I had several updates to make. So now that felt good. So if we turn the page, this second point is, what is your philosophy and or feelings about death? Now, this is where, if we can actually be thoughtful about what we think happens after death, and maybe have some beliefs and opinions about it, which I kind of think most people do think about it. They might not talk about it, but they're thinking about it. This is a very helpful piece for grief. Because then the people left behind, they're not having to guess. So if you can actually share your feelings, then it gives people something to hang on to. Like and I'm gonna share some experiences when my mom died, okay? And when she died, I kept a journal. So here's the original journal. I did her eulogy. And she died of cancer, pretty classic 8 to 9 month journey with cancer. And I was living in France at the time and had just gotten married. But I spent many months with my mom. I was just like, I know exactly where I need to be, and that is with my mom. We're a big family, 5 kids. My sister and I just, spent as much. We just did the primary caregiving in the beginning. And at one point in her journey, she did not want to talk about death. She did not, she just kind of numbed out. And Hallmark movies, that's what we would do. We would watch one Hallmark movie after another. And they're kind of numbing, you know what I mean? And so then one day, she had a really bad day of pain. And what had happened is, this was purely palliative. They had to radiate a place at the base of her tongue, and that's where one of the tumors was. And that she would be in terrible pain for 2 weeks. And so, and she couldn't talk, because it was right there close to the throat. And so, boy, we just had to kind of help get our mother through this, And one morning, because I was staying there, she wrote me this note. Don't be scared. I am so miserable. I welcome death. You must remember it's time for me. She was 77 years old. I know I'll be missed, particularly by you and Andrea, but talk about me a lot. Think of me as on a trip, and I'll be back. If or when I am in hospice, that part I'm not gonna read. That one got a little too personal. But like she just by chance wrote that. And I mean, I was trying to have conversations with my mom, but that, Hallmark movies, it was just hard to find the space for it. That helped me so much. And so as a death doula, I highly encourage people that the more you can talk about death, then you're leaving your loved ones with something to hang on to. And so, that little piece I got from her was really, really helpful. So being able to talk about what you believe around will death, is it hard? Is it easy? Will you reunite with your ancestors or friends? Are you afraid? Are you curious? Are you ready? Are you not ready? There's no right or wrong answers. There's only what you think and feel, and it's to honor that. And most of the time, we just don't have any clue because A, it's hard to ask those questions. B, and it's hard to answer them. Like for my mom, it was impossible to answer them. That's why in the privacy of your own home, of your own inner being, right? You can start having these conversations with yourself to prepare yourself, and then to have the insights, the temerity to be able to share that with the ones you love when you're ready. And even if you're not ready to have the conversation face to face, the document exists. So this is an amazing project for your own personal growth and insights that will help you live a stronger life. So we ask, do you believe in heaven? Do you believe in angels or spirit guides or religious icons, ascended masters? Whatever you believe is what you believe. And, what limits us is the fact that we're dealing with the great unknown and the great mystery. A lot of times people have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, have you ever heard yourself say that? What do you think is going to happen? I have no idea, because we don't know, do we? We really don't know. I mean, there's many people who have had near-death experiences, and they come back and talk about it. You can find them by the thousands now. I listen to a whole bunch of those. I love hearing what the near-deathers, what they say, but then each of their experiences are so individual, There's not any one thing or one way in which even an experience like that happens. So what I always suggest is just stretch your imagination a little bit. Yeah, we don't know. But what do you think? What do you hope for? And at one point, now the cancer moved to my mom's brain, which is kind of typical in the type of cancer she had because it was very metastatic by the time we found it. But I caught just right before, she was still coherent, And I had to muster up so much courage for this conversation. But it was I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to have this conversation with my mom. I am her daughter. I felt like I had a right to ask this question for the sake of our ancestry. And I said, and Mom, so what do you think's going to happen when you die? And she was just, deer in headlights, right? And I just shut up, just let that linger. And then she said, I think I'm going to see my father and my mother and my brothers And she lost her father when she was 17. You know, she just missed him so much. And, you know, so she says that. And then I said to her, just intuitively, I mean, you know, I would become a death doula many years later. This was 2003. I said, Mom, I think it's going to be really easy. Just relax. It's just going to be easy. And she's just staring at me. You know, because she would accept no help from a minister or a religious person or anything. And then I said, okay. And then my mom, this is, you know, of course I grew up before cell phones and I used to travel a lot on business, and she would find me no matter what hotel I was in and to know I was safe. And that was kind of a standing joke, but you know, I sure missed not having my mother because she was like the one human who cared if I was safe or not. And although my sister's a close second. So I said to her, I said, Mom, when you're on the other side, I want you to call me. I knew she would understand that. Said, I want you to call me and let me know everything is okay. And she's just staring at me. And then she was like, okay. And then I tried to get in one more question, and then she just looked at me and she's like, Jenny, you know, you're wearing me out. And so I said, okay, you know, and I knew that was the end. And that whole thing transpired in probably 3 to 4 minutes. But I just needed that information. And it was a little gutsy, you know, a little forward, but I'm really glad I had that conversation with her. And I just thought, why should it be so hard? Why should it be so hard for the caregivers and the people, you know, who love our peeps? And that we should have an idea of what happens when we die, since we're all gonna go through that passage, right? All right, so even if you feel nothing happens, there are, you know, an atheist would feel there's nothing that happens. But just say a little bit more about that, right? Well, what do you mean by that? And another part another story I want to share around this, because we need to share death stories. Like, I'm sharing death stories of my mother, but boy, do we need to do this for each other, because people just clam up and get so quiet. And it really helps. We've heard death stories here today from the ones who are the grieving. And so I worked with a client, a young person, 34 years old. He died in August of cancer. My clients are young people with cancer. And he and I worked together. And I do a lot of my work intuitively. And he has 3 small children, a lovely wife. Of course, he was afraid to die. Of course, he was afraid about what would happen with his wife and his children. And so just my intuitive instincts were, and he was open to this, was that it would be helpful if he could experience his death before he has his death. And so we did this guided meditation. And in that meditation, I brought him through, it was long, this entire experience. And then it showed his wife and his children, a 9-year-old and 2 7-year-old twins, grieving him. And then it showed them way out into the future, all grown up, and they were okay. You know, they were okay. And most of us are okay, right? Like, I loved in the presentation with the holes, you know, I think it was Rachel's, the size of the hole changes, right? That's beautiful depiction. So what happened, his name was Nick. He, unbeknownst to me, told almost everybody he knew that he was not afraid to die anymore. And then when he was actually dying, all these people came through. It was a very open, it was an open house kind of experience. And I'm meeting all these people. They're like, oh, you're Jen, the death doula. I'm like, yeah. Nick told me all about his work with you and that he's not afraid to die. And I mean, I'm, caveat. There's some fear. Our bodies are afraid to die. Our bodies are hanging on for dear. He went through that experience of that guided meditation was a profound experience that helped, I'm sure, Nick, as he was dying, but it helped everybody that he knew because he was open and he shared it. I've never had, it's profound. I'm so goosebumps and it's all pretty new, right? I was like, wow. So it really helps when we can become friends with death, because death can be our teacher, and that we share that with people. Because Nick touched the lives. There were 40, 50, 60 people coming through his house. He touched many, many people, had a lot of friends, and his wife let the door be open. Kids were there. Kids got to see, here's what it looks like when someone is dying, not when they're in the casket, right? And it's hard, it's laborious. That's why, you have a death doula or a team of people. And so that it was the most beautiful experience imaginable. And that it's hard and beautiful all at the same time. So that the more we can share these experiences from our hearts, to me, that's part of my mission, is death awareness in the entire community, so that we can have these kind of conversations with each other because they're so helpful. All right. So when we share the philosophy or feelings, that can really help lessen grief because people have perspective. So the next thing, are we ready to go on from there? Questions or additions? The next thing we add is our healthcare power of attorney. So I know a lot of you had that session yesterday. You can also figure it out online. Just go online, print out the form. So here's my form, and I have that right here in my packet, okay? So I've got my death plan, but this needs, somebody needs to be able to grab this immediately, okay? I have 3 people. I have my main POA, who is my nephew. He's a lawyer, and his wife's a nurse practitioner. I just feel like that is a 2-for-1 deal right there. And I didn't want to have my siblings kind of have to be the primary, but then I've got one as the secondary and one as a third. So just so you know, those 3 people, they all have safes. I sent them a copy of the death plan, the power of attorney, and my last will and testament. So I have that in 3 different locations, as well as my underwear drawer, okay? So I just want to make sure I say that. So with the healthcare power of attorney, and I know you had a great session on that yesterday, it is to keep in mind that you can fill out that POA yourself, but also for you or for anybody in that gradual dying who might have hospice care, that's very much a part of the hospice model. They have social workers who help complete the medical POA. Ideally, our POA is up on my chart, so it's right there in our medical record. So that's a possibility too. And you want your POA to be as many places as possible. So 4th, what I want to happen as I die. Death care before, during, and after death. Now this is a big section of the plan, okay? So I kind of put the first conversation here is about hospice. Has the hospice?
Yesterday afternoon.
Yesterday afternoon, okay. So hospice is so helpful. One of the saddest things is that hospice statistically it arrives around a death, 5 days before? Did they cover that statistic yesterday? Like my mom got hospice 6 months. It was great. We needed hospice. And so that conversation, that's a whole other story, is a hard thing. But boy, it is worth having the conversation so that you have hospice resources with you. Now that's if you're in that I'm gradually dying, I have a life-limiting illness. Then, and I also am throwing in here the whole conversation of for you to think about either hypothetically, or maybe you've had to think about it because you're experiencing a life-limiting illness. How do you feel about treatment? Because the way it works in our medical system, it is treat, treat, treat to the end. And if you're young, there's really not even a lot of options around that. There seems to be a little more grace if we're older, right? But that whole treating aggressively then takes away from the quality of our ability to die well. This is my opinion, okay? I'm just stating my opinion. But we get just so entwined in that medical system, and then it leaves no space for dying. I send brochures to oncologists. I never hear back from them. But it's like, please, can you just be able to have a little space for a conversation about how somebody feels about their dying? Because, you know, people can just have no time to do the actual contemplation because the treatment is so rough, okay? All right. And then also, it's really worth it for you to think about your own pain management decisions, because when hospice comes in and then it's my loved one, you just cannot believe how many caregivers and loved ones just don't think a person should be medicated when hospice is trying to create comfort care. I'm sure hospice makes mistakes from time to time. We all do. You know, over medication can happen, but boy, it is helpful if you are thinking those things through for yourself. You know, like for me personally, I love my mind. I'm going to want to preserve the quality of my thinking as much as possible, but I do not want to be in pain. And so, you know, I'm going to do the seesaw with you. And I mean, I'm going to, if I'm in really bad pain, I'm going to conk out, you know, and I'm going to give me the drugs. Is like, yeah.
I'm allergic to pain.
Okay. Yes. So you're going to say, give me the morphine, right?
Yeah.
And Ativan, and I mean, it's pretty basic drugs, what hospice gives. And so that is something really helpful to have family discussions about, especially anybody in the beginning stages of a diagnosis. You're not going to think it through to the very end, but boy, like my mom, that was her biggest fear, was pain. That's why that note happened, because she wanted a morphine pump. We brought her to the pain specialist, and they're like, you know, that is overkill. I don't care. Well, it's expensive. I'll pay for it. But she did not need the pump. She just had to get through that 2 weeks. And so she got through the 2 weeks, and then the patches and everything that hospice gave was fine, you know. So I recommend having that conversation.
If I can just kind of piggyback on that.
Sure.
Because you mentioned something that I've seen a lot too, is you said, you know, you send your brochures to the oncologists and they never call you back.
Mhm.
And there's a stigma in the medical field of viewing what we're talking about here as a failure. And that's because that's what they're trained to do. They're trained to save lives. They're not trained to watch them go away. So it's so important for all of us to be able to advocate for ourselves. And that's not always easy for people to do. So I appreciate you saying to have these conversations with our loved ones. And I'm glad we're having these conversations here in this room, so that when we see our loved ones in that situation, they might not be comfortable saying, you know what, I'm tired and I don't want to pursue treatment anymore. Their loved ones might see that though, and because they've had that conversation, can say, you know what, Mom, I think, you seem like you're getting tired. Maybe we don't want to do this. Let's talk to them about not continuing treatment. So, Sorry,
Thank you.
I just wanted to.
I think that's is the point with it, is the whole failure piece. And so you're not going to hear those conversations from most doctors. I mean, some are more enlightened than others. They tend to froth to the top in documentary films and podcasts and such. Okay, figuring out where you want to die is also important. You know, do you want to be at home with medical aid in dying, which is legal in 6 states? Of course, that's not an option here in Ohio. You could say, I want to die in the forest, you know, and you could literally, you can die where you want. If not, medical aid in dying is maybe another good topic for a Before I Die festival, but that would be an hour-long conversation right there, or topic. So, and who do you want to be there in the room while you're dying? You know, you might not want Uncle, you know, Uncle Irvin there, who's tends to be overly dramatic, or, you know, you can really have, this is where a death doula comes in, because these are hard conversations to have with family members who are very invested in an outcome one way or the other. And so what happens if, like, because we're kind of getting into the minutia now, if a father or mother is trying to say to their kid, you know, I really want to think about what's going to happen here in the room while I'm dying. Oh, you're not going to die. That's like, don't talk that way. That's so negative. And so, you know, everybody's well-meaning and doing the best they can, right? But what a death doula can do is be that neutral presence who is not going to bat their eyes or shake when you can just talk of the greatest minutia of details of what a person wants to happen. And then you do, I mean, you can't guarantee anything because surprises happen, but you can do the best you can to create an atmosphere that is supportive and meaningful to that person who's dying. And then most people don't even think about all the possibilities. You know, like, oh, we can have a ritual. Yes, like, let me tell you about a ritual that we did with Nick, where, and I heard about this ritual from my various resources. And it was, this is while Nick was actively dying. And so that as a friend or a family member, a cousin came in, I had 2 threads. And I had 4 different colors representing the elements. So they could choose what color they wanted. And then they took a thread, an embroidery thread, and they tied it around Nick's wrist. You tie the first knot and say a prayer for him. Smooth passage, Brother Nick. And you tie another knot. I remember that time, you know, maybe a little laughter. Tie another knot. I really wish you Godspeed. Tie another knot. And there his wife was, listening to all these beautiful messages. And then you have somebody tie it around your wrist. And this is mine, you know, it's not going to last here forever, right? And so a ritual like that, and then he was cremated, and he had just a band of these threads that went right along with him. All of these prayers and good wishes right along with him in the you know, crematorium, in that space. And that just, you know, anchors the heart. And so we can think about things like that and be quite intentional. Do you want candles? Do you want some good scents? Like I say, for me, what's important for me, I don't want people talking about their grocery list while I'm dying. Do that outside, you know? I kind of want a sacred and a more solemn space around me. And other people would be like, who, you know, did the Bengals win? And that would be their joyousness. They just want everybody to be normal and happy and having fun. But you see, you know, wouldn't it be nice to know what people's preferences are? Because normally we're just guessing and doing our best around the deathbed. But when we have a plan And then what a doula can do as well is be the person who is guiding the experience and ensuring that these things get done, because you don't want to rely on the wife and the mother and because they just need to be actively in their process. So you have somebody around who is holding space at a much higher level. Okay. And then, of course, what do you want to happen after you die? Do you want to go to a funeral home? Do you want, and this is where, if you know you want to be at a funeral home, just make all those arrangements ahead of time. That's where pre-planning is preferred. Just get that done ahead of time. And then it's done. Like, that box is checked. That helps everybody. Okay, but here's one thing, and a lot of times people go to a funeral home, right? But just one thing, you don't have to go to the funeral home immediately, okay? So, that's one thing I learned in my death doula training. So when Nick died, and I'm allowed to share this with you, I have permission because we have to share death stories. And and it was my first time to have this experience, but we all need first times, right? So he died. I was not in the house when he died. I came as quickly as I could. There happened to be a hospice person there, so that was great. But we had advised the hospice person, don't call the funeral home right away. Because that's usually what happens. You call the funeral home right away because, oh my God, there's a dead body in here, and people don't know what to do with that. Instead, we just hung out with Nick for a couple of hours. It was fine. We had a little team of people. We bathed him, kind of did. And then the kids, we did the initial bathing, about 3 or 4 of us. And then we had a bowl of water, and I had created an altar for Nick. Like, what I knew he wanted. I did not have a death plan for him. He did not have a death plan. His death came quickly. His wife knew he wanted to be cremated, and he preferred to have a celebration of life. And I knew what he wanted was something sacred. That's what I knew when all the work that I did with Nick. So I created an altar. I had red roses and white roses, and they were this altar was with him during the 4-day dying process. So at the end, I said to somebody, let's take these petals off of the rose. We put some in a bowl of water, warm water, with a little essential oil. And then after we kind of did that initial cleaning, we invited the kids, and at this point there was probably about a dozen people around him. And then it was a ceremonial cleaning, and just everybody participated. And then we put rose petals all around his body. And then there happened to be, it was a downstairs room with a hospital bed from hospice, but like a big queen size bed. And so the kids, the parents, it was a family bed. All of us gathered around just telling stories about Nick, just reliving memories. And we did that for a couple of hours. It was the most beautiful thing. What a way to honor. I also did some ceremonial honoring of him. I'm doing this because I had a drum, and I did things I knew Nick would like, and it elevated the whole situation. So we can be outside of the box. Then the funeral home was called, and then that got very real for people, and then, which is appropriate, because then his body had to leave, and we get on with the rest of the death ritual, right? So what am I doing time-wise?
You're right up against it.
Right up against it. So the reason why I have this big, lengthy, detailed plan for you is because you didn't need me to speak to all of the points. I am here to inspire you to do this for yourself and for the sake of your family. I have eulogy tips for you. I think a really important, this point 8, who needs to be notified of my death? You know, in my case, because I'm single, it's not like my siblings know all my friends. So I had to be quite intentional about that. And then only thing about passwords is don't get stuck there. Just put whatever your code is in your phone and don't let yourself get stuck there. I got stuck there a lot. Do the best you can. And then, as I mentioned early, that you communicate this, whoever your POAs are, give them a copy of your death plan. And, give it to them, more the merrier. And I invite them to read it. I don't know if anybody in my family that I've given it to has read it, but they're more than welcome to read it and have conversation with me about it. Can you hand me this? Well, maybe I have it. I'm going to pass around, if I have it. If you would like this document in a Word document, I'm going to invite you to put your email list down. Or if you just want to know what kind of death events are going on in Cincinnati.
And we can definitely add that to the list of resources as we compile those for the
Good.
festival.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's good. Use this document, share it with people. I have no concerns about intellectual property. It's just like the more people who have this information, the better. Okay? All right. Well, thank
Everybody.
you for your attention.
It's nice to kind of put a bow on, a day and a half. We talked about a lot of those pieces, and this kind of puts it into an action plan, which is fantastic. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that. I will tell you that, we've been in the idea of grief and death a while, and we're going to take a little different tack now and go to kind of a legacy kind of thing. We've talked about before you die, but we also need to talk a little bit about, what the legacy of those who've gone before us, and what are the things that we can do to perpetuate that legacy. So I'm going to invite our next speaker up, so I can wake up my handy dandy little camera.
Sorry.
Tim,
Okay, we have light. That's good.
I'll probably do it. We can watch the Buckeye game if you like.
Yeah, it would be nice, but, You need a clicker, Tim.
Yeah,
All right.
please.
Hang on a sec, I'll get a clicker. So while I'm getting a clicker, I can introduce him from memory because I've known him his whole life. This is Jen Walters. He is once again proof that nepotism is always alive and well at Dodds Memorials. That both his parents worked at Dodds over the years. Tim ended up coming to work at Dodds and working on our sending truck for a period of time. And one day he approached me, he said, you know what? I would really like to get into doing some cemetery restoration work, doing some work with foundations
You're
and
taking the whole intro.
that's what I'm good at, Tim. And so what he's going to do is kind of go down that tack is how important it is to really keep these things preserved. So with that, Tim Walters.
Hi. This is my wife, Randy Walters. She's believes in me, just like Neil did a long time ago. He started telling that story to both of my parents worked at Dodge, started in 1998, I believe. My dad opened the Springfield branch for Dodge back then. And so I literally grew up in this industry. I was born in 1991. So he's known me since, well, before that, because your parents and my parents were friends. But flash forward to when I was 15, my dad came home from work. He said, hey, I had a family that came in and they wanted their monument clean. We don't get asked that a lot. Why don't you take my pressure washer out there, see what it looks like? I'm like, okay. loaded it up, go out there, it was close, hose it down, took a before picture and an after picture, and it looked great. They paid me a couple $100. I'm like, I have an idea. So for the next couple of years, I took before and after pictures, did 10 or 15 in 2 years' time, set a meeting with Neil and said, hey, here's what I've been working on. Would this be a service that you'd be interested in offering? Unfortunately for him, he offered me a job and he added another Walters to his staff because my mom also worked there too.
Nobody said I'm smart.
Yeah. So for the next 7 years, I worked at Dodge, learning new skills like bronze refinishing. I've got an example out there. Neil came to me and said, hey, we need foundations poured for new monuments in Cincinnati. Do you want to do that? I'm like, absolutely not. So I go to Cincinnati and I start pouring foundations. And then that grew. So then while pouring foundations and cleaning monuments, I was pouring foundations in one of my cemeteries at that point, and they said, hey, we need someone to manage the cemetery. Would you want to manage a cemetery? I said, absolutely not. So I managed a cemetery for about 13 years now. And so while I'm managing the cemetery, I hire a new gravedigger. Well, unfortunately, he got sick and wanted someone to take over digging graves for him. So, do you have any interest in digging graves? I said, absolutely not. So I sold my house, bought a dump truck and an excavator. And that's actually the truth. So now, throughout these years, we've grown into all these different aspects of, a story. We can dig graves at 21 different cemeteries. We manage cemeteries. We clean monuments. We do whole cemetery restoration. And throughout that, we've learned about people's history, their genealogy, and why it's important. I got out of just cleaning a monument and more into preservation. And because it's your story, that's what genealogy is the important, and here's the importance of it. It's a great source of information for the family. You can read inscriptions that researchers didn't have before. A lot of times we come into places and they're destroyed or they're lost or they found it on ancestry.com or something and they know where about it is. And then as we probe and we start Humpty Dumpty, as we call it, gluing these things back together, you can find more. There's historical accuracy. Some towns and cities, and even as simple as families themselves, they don't know some of these stories. And you can find it through doing just simple time preservation and cleaning of your story. You can link generations. Actual geologists can trace lines across different where their ancestors came from, why they ended up in Kettering or Springfield or wherever. There's cultural and social context, the epitaphs, the religious symbols. You might learn that your ancestors were a different religion than you ever thought, and there's plenty of tangible links to the past. And then you can supplement that with church or civil records where like a death or a marriage record might be missing. And you can find that on something as simple as your memorial, your marker, your bronze, your monument. And then the preservation of local community history is pretty crazy how we've gotten into this. And I've got an example for you. This one, we just finished this project in Trenton, Ohio. And while we were doing this, the head of the historical society came out. This was broken, grass was growing over top of it. And he was a founder of the city, and he served in the New Jersey militia under George Washington. And with that, they made this guided tour for their city. And they gave me a copy of it, and they're all proud. And I am too. And there's 6 of them in there that we ended up finding that were lost. And they have a guided tour now for their city and their cemetery of history. They knew that story, but they didn't know where they were at. And that's, part of a whole city's genealogy. It's not just a specific family, but imagine the Pierce family seeing that for the first time. Because his name's on the signs when you pull in the town. And then more recently, or before that, earlier this year, we did this project. It was for Lemon G. Neely in St. Mary's, Ohio. This family called me. They live in Houston, Texas. And it's one of the most unique families I've ever had the pleasure of working with in my career. They made it known that money wasn't an issue and all the things that you don't just hear right off the bat. So we have a large family estate. It's in St. Mary's. Do you travel that far? I said, absolutely. They flew in and I met them up there in October of last year. They said, do you want to restore this? I'm like, sure. So we start working on it, and then they came back in town, and we keep going with it. And what was fun about this is I had an eye for this right away because of my career with Dodds. But this granite, Neil?
Stony Creek.
Stony Creek, which is the granite that Dodds quarried back in when?
Late 1800s, early 1900s.
So when I first walked up, I could tell what granite this was. The family didn't know that. So part of the history that they got, their genealogy, they knew who Lemon G. was, or Lemon G. Neely. He invented offshore drilling in St. Mary's Lake. Ended up in oil down in Houston and wildcatted down. But that was his story. And he's this famous person in their family in the city of St. Mary's in Houston. But they didn't know anything about where he's actually buried, how it was built. And I called Neil. I said, the inside of this thing had all that Italian marble from Carrara. And then what else was really neat is here's the bronze doors that we worked on. I started recognizing this from working with Dodds and Neil throughout the years. I was able to pull the George Dodds and Sons original vent off of this mausoleum. I called them. Not only did we find that for that family, Dodds had the original key to this mausoleum door because Neil doesn't throw anything away.
Well, I sold the thing, so pretty good.
So, and just learning those stories, and I could stand up here for days and tell you them all, but they all matter. Every single one, whether it's a city genealogy or personal family history, but something that there's 6 of these, they're this big, and they didn't know. And they're from the family that I met, they're from Houston, but 3 generations before that were from St. Mary's. And Xenia got involved somehow. And but it's just really fun to show people stuff that they don't know and learn along the way myself too. They wrote an article about it in the St. Mary's paper. That was neat. I was famous for a day. I asked Neil if he wanted to come. He said no.
I got a face for radio now.
Yeah, me too. So then, back to kind of like the importance of the physical memorial and the legacy is you're honoring the deceased, number one. And that could tie when grieving, like earlier, if you decide to memorialize, it should be honored forever. And you can maintain these things. Why not honor your ancestors' grief by, preserving what they felt was necessary to honor their loved one? There's architectural and artistic value. Throughout the years, you can see what I see a lot in the old ones is the designs. Somewhere in the 1700s, it went from skull and crossbones to angels and doves. Like the thought of death changed throughout the years. And then the environmental and green space conservation. If you keep your cemetery nice, it's going to keep a lot of riffraff and stuff out. And that's what you want for your cities. They're aesthetically pleasing and they're environmentally sustainable. And again, vandalism, unfortunately, is always prevalent in this line of work. I've got pictures of those that are awful. I didn't include them. But if you maintain some of these things, it keeps that kind of stuff out of your cemetery to honor all the thousands of people that could be buried in one place. And then here's just other examples of single family stories that they didn't know. This one is actually in Mount Moriah Cemetery in Cincinnati. They found this person on Ancestry.com but couldn't read it. They didn't know what it was. We were able to preserve that so they can. This family, this is in Covington, Ohio. Their father was a truck driver their whole life, but they didn't even know that the bronze had a truck on it. They had no idea. And they just, when they put the death date on, we said, hey, this is a good time. Why don't we make it match? And then they were crying. 20 years, well, at that point, a year later, but what's that, 9, 10 years after William passed, that was his bronze. His grandkids and his kids had no memory of that memorial honoring his genealogy, his legacy. He was a truck driver. Then this one, Neil remembers. This is, I don't know much about the actual battle. Neil, if you could help me, the Oak Knoll.
It was an Oak Knoll commemoration. I really am not familiar with
So
exactly
long
that.
story, this bronze is taller than I am. It's set in a boulder and it's
that's
not
saying
far
something.
from here.
Where is it?
It's by, what's the golf course?
Oak Knoll near Patterson Hill, over by Hills and Hills Golf Course in Dayton.
Yeah, and this is one of the only World War I memorials in all of Dayton. And it was lost until Elaine Hendrick, was that the one that found this one? She's a remarkable woman doing stuff with veterans work and all that. But genealogy for entire wars and cities that we didn't even know were there. The Boy Scouts would come put flags on, but now they poured new sidewalks around it. They keep the bad stuff out of there, and you can honor it for a long, long time. And then whole cemetery restorations. This is at Calvary Cemetery in Dayton. These are all the nuns that they had buried there. And the cemetery took it upon themselves to do this project and not have individual families call and ask. Well, this is a complete redo, preserving the history of not just one, but I think there was 170 of them in there, all together, all matching again. And that just helps preserve your legacy. Is how I feel. My legacy is this work. This is all I've ever done. This is all I'll ever do. And I just think if it's such an important part of this industry that a lot of people don't even know exists. And I just hope to change that. And that's about all I got. I got a 3-year-old that's wanting me to come pick her up. Does anybody have any questions? I was supposed to share this time with someone else and they didn't show up. So they had an emergency or something.
So I think one of the things that people don't realize is that when we have gravestones, tombstones, these kind of things, this is where we go most of the time to honor and to talk to them, and it's like a sacred space. And so I think what you're doing is completely amazing. I didn't even know this existed. I told you earlier that I had no idea that this even took place. And I think that we cherish this little space of what we have of our loved ones is so sacred and so important that I think this is amazing what you do.
Well, thank you.
I noticed they did some restoration in Lebanon Cemetery. Were you involved in that?
I've cleaned individual monuments in Lebanon Cemetery, but I've not worked on many big projects. We built something big in there years. It was a Dodds monument, but I forget what was it, a mausoleum or?
We've done a columbarium in there.
Okay, they run together after a while, but I've done work in there, but I don't think that project that you're referring to, I was a part of.
I'm glad it exists. Thank you.
Well, no problem. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So 2 questions. If a stone doesn't, I mean, can you restore something that to the naked eye just looks like it is just flat?
It
Like
depends on how far it's gone.
Yeah, I've got countless, if you look on our website or our Facebook, even some of the brochures, like this, a lot of times they think that this lettering doesn't even exist. And there is truth in that. When you get older at sandstone and limestone, you might know the number, but that weathers away at a certain rate. But most of the time, if you clean it safely and properly, there is still something there. Then you can get rubbings and learn more history about yourself. There are some examples of what you're talking about, but most of the time it's still there. It's just dirty. I mean, this has never been cleaned, and it was installed in 1877.
Wow.
So I always tell people, if I stood outside for 200 years, I'd probably look pretty bad too. So-
And he pinpointed one thing that's really important. Just running out and cleaning one of these monuments, if you don't know what you're doing, is very dangerous.
Yeah.
There is a way to do it, because limestone and sandstone were originally used back in the day because they were soft and easy to degrade, are sedimentary rocks. That means a bunch of dead organic material got smushed together and it became stone. And so that is very delicate to work with, and there are some that are completely wasted away. Marble is metamorphic rock. It is heated limestone that is recrystallized, and so it's a little bit harder, but still incredibly delicate. And if Tim doesn't do this right, he could do as much damage to the surface of this memorial is. So
It's
just
very easy to blow out the center of what if you just show up. Like when I said I pressure wash monuments, I've learned a lot since then. And all of that. There's things we know a whole lot about what not to do, and that's what you're getting at, and you're right. And also to your point about why there were sandstone and limestone, is they didn't have the saws and the stuff back then. They hand carved all of these. I hate when I have to level these because that side's fatter than that side and that side's not level and over because they chisel them, you know? And so a lot of times you just find the eye, but yeah, you're absolutely spot on. The do no harm method is a thing, and there's a difference in preservation and just cleaning something. People go out there. I've had families take steel wool to their polish marker or their bronze. Like, well, it had sap on it. Well, now it doesn't have anything on it. And that's a hard thing to tell someone.
Even magic erasers, beware. Magic erasers do not use
Yeah.
those on headstones. You would think that they'd be fine, but they're not.
Well, a lot of people will tell you, do not power wash, do not power do
You
not
can do
power
what you
wash.
want to drink.
Tim will tell you that, the term power wash is a general term. There are 1,000 wands you can put on a memorial. There's
I have
hot,
adjustable
there's cold.
pressure guns, and like I would not pressure wash that. But that granite mausoleum, there's nothing I can do to hurt that. I don't have some 6,000 PSI pressure washer. That's engraving pounds per square inch. And you're right. That's the safe way to do it. And knowing what not to do. And that's exactly right. Bronze. This is a great example on the table in here. Is we kind of adapted on that Neely mausoleum, the restore, don't replace. And because people don't know it's possible, that bronze, someone bought a brand new bronze because it was green. Well, how much do those go for these days? A lot. Well, I ordered the paint from the makers of these bronze. I have to believe we're one of the only in-cemetery bronze refinishers that I know of. But you don't have to replace that because that's part of your history. It's original. I love that. He's a history nut. That's why we've always got along. And no, I kid, but we like that. That's why I do this is all the civic stuff we do. And living in Dayton, what a blessing. All the history that there is here on that side. But it's all history. That's just that family's history. That's that family's history. So it all matters is the point of what I do. And I think of what we kind of all do.
We talked about it yesterday. There's going to be a time when records, to your point, go missing, right? I've been to countless cemeteries where they've lost their burial books. You can go into any county in the state, and I guarantee there's going to be some death records, birth records that are missing, marriage records that go missing. You have something catastrophic that would happen in Nashville, North Carolina. I can promise you there's some important documents in Nashville, North Carolina that no longer exist. And I can promise you is if they've been digitized, at some point digital assets will be destroyed somewhere. That's been there for hundreds of years, will still be there for hundreds of years. And it's the one place where you can go and say, founder of Trenton. So it is so vitally important not only to carry on the legacy of memorializing, but to care for the memorials that already exist. And on a personal note, and he did not pay me for this, it has been such a joy to see the snot-nosed little punk kid that I used to know grow into a guy that has come and found his own passion and has gone out on his own and pursued that passion. And it's a passion that makes a difference. And so I kind of sit over here kind of like a proud papa to a certain extent because he's doing important work. And I like to think that, a little part of that was born into being around Dodds and being around this industry for his whole life. So I appreciate
It
what
wouldn't
he
have been
does.
possible without Dodds Memorials, his dad, and you specifically, and my dad, and her. She let me sell my house and buy an excavator. So.
And she's still here.
Right.
It's not very comfortable.
On the
Sleeping
right
in an
side,
excavator.
we're actually
Not air
in
conditioning
contract on a new house. But she's believed in me, and it's working.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, my other question was, with all the cremations, like, my mom's cremains are in the ocean down at Jacksonville Beach, like, we're kind of really moving away from this type of memorial, and it could really have some damaging impacts to
That's
culture.
kind of why I think preservation is more important, because you're kind of right. At some point, it will cease to exist. So if we don't preserve what we already have, then there's nothing. And, Neil is big on, cremation, still memorializing with cremation. And I think it's super important as well, because there's beautiful ways to do it. There's many ways to do it. And then, 100 years from now, someone's cleaning that and talking up at a funeral home about how cool it is. But if we don't take care of that, and you are right, eventually they're just gone. And so, like what we said before, on some of these projects, like if you look back in here, that's all I got left is this much of what used to be a 8-foot monument. And it is important. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, and I will tell you, there are things you can do for a person that's been scattered. And we talked about that yesterday, right? Cenotaphs. Cenotaphs are memorials to people that do not reside at that location. And it can be as simple as getting one of our porcelain rectangles that have their name, and you could even put scattered at, and you put it right on the family monument, and now you've got a permanent record of existence, even though that person is not physically present. And so there are ways to commemorate that don't have to be ridiculously expensive or large or impactful. And I think you really hit on something that I don't think about enough. People always whine about green and green and green, and cemeteries aren't green because they do all this, that. Whoever went to Woodland, it is an arboretum. It has all the native trees known to Ohio residing within its grounds. So you can focus on the fact that there are caskets and concretes from a green perspective, or you can focus on the fact that, yes, it is a designated place that has always been designated, and there are green space, there's trees, there's grass that's never going away because somebody designated that as a cemetery. So just like everything, you've got your pluses and your minuses, but to say that cemeteries are in general not green is just missing half the story. It really is.
I agree. I've seen such a big movement, if you will, an effort to more naturalization. There's natural spreading grounds, there's natural burying grounds, there's wild flower fields. They may not come out and say that it's their effort to go green, but that's what that is. It's help an offset a little from, we can't get out of the burial vaults and all that stuff. But like he said, that's always going to be a cemetery. It can't be anything else. And in my opinion, I think it should be in its own concrete box. But, that could be personal preference. But you're right. There is a change. People are noticing it more. And I'm glad I was able to bring some light to it. But they're trying. A lot of cemeteries are putting in natural grounds. Look at what
We're
Calvin's
talking
done.
about it too in Mount Zion.
Yeah, at our cemetery, we've got some land that we just can't use and make a spreading ground because of the cremation that we're getting. We do allow one cremation burial on one existing grave, which a lot of cemeteries do, but epitaph? Cenotaph is great. I push everybody to Dodge, say, if we bury your cremations here, that's fine, but I recommend getting at least a flush marker, because we'll put a record with it. It's stored in my fireproof box forever, then that's it. So then that goes back to what you were saying about, people aren't memorial and where is it going? And you're right. That's a good way, because if there's an existing monument, you can add it to it. And
Very simple process.
I think
Twins.
memorialization is huge. You have to. That's the story. Someone mentioned earlier the dash between the years. Remember Byron? On their wall in Byron, it says, the only thing that matters is the dash between the years. And I remember that from forever. And I think that's right. And you see them right on both of what happened between 1940 and 2021 is the story. And that that resonated with me earlier when someone said that. What were you saying?
The plinth.
Yeah, a plinth, a sub base, like some of these will have extra ones, and that's just kind of how that goes.
Yeah, we can
You can
add
add-
extra names of those additional bodies in the grave by just basically adding a piece between the two existing pieces and
Kinda like-
it's that way.
If this was a regular monument, you'd put another base here, then you could letter that. If it's
There's cost-effective ways to permanently memorialize. I think a lot of people get tied into, I don't want to spend $10,000 or $8,000 or $5,000 on a monument. We sell markers as low as $250 to $300. You can get one of those cenotaphs for probably under $350. It doesn't have to be expensive. My advocacy is that you just memorialize. I'll help you find a way that meets your budget, but just memorialize.
Especially considering I gotta clean something in 200 years from now, my great. But thank you all very much. Great being here.
So we will now kind of transition. Very good. If you have a chance before Tim runs away, go check out his booth because you can see what the bronze restoration looks like. If you want to grab a brochure, you can. He's got to get out of here and pick up a screaming 3-year-old that wants to see him. So he'll have to be moving on. But what we're going to do now is transition into a death cafe. Is that in that room? Is that where we have it kind of set?
Yeah, we got the circle chairs.
So you guys, we've got some time, so restroom break, grab some coffee. I think there's a piece of candy or two laying around somewhere if you want one. Take a walk outside, get some sun, and then we will get with Rachel and we'll introduce